Sussex, England, December 24, 1819. Snow fell in thick, deliberate flakes across the torchlit drive of Kenwood Hall, transforming the ancient stone manor into something from a winter fairy tale. Inside the great ballroom, chandeliers blazed with hundreds of candles, their light reflecting off polished marble floors and the jewels adorning the throats of England's finest families. The annual Christmas ball hosted by Nicholas Edward Talbot, Marquis of Kenwood, was the most coveted invitation of the season, a glittering assembly where fortunes were made, reputations established, and futures decided with champagne and the careful choreography of the waltz. But tonight, beneath the laughter and music, an undercurrent of anticipation rippled through the crowd. The Marquis himself stood near the terrace doors, his dark evening clothes immaculate, his expression distant as he watched couples form for the next dance. At 34, Nicholas Talbot possessed the kind of austere handsomeness that made young ladies whisper behind their fans, though he avoided the notion of remarrying since assuming his unexpected title 5 years prior. Those who remembered him as the carefree third son noted how grief had carved new lines around his mouth, how his eyes held shadows that no amount of candlelight could dispel. What they did not know, what he had never spoken of publicly, was that his heart had been buried 5 years ago in the cold waters off the coast of Hampshire, alongside a woman the world believed lost to the sea. If stories of love that survives death itself move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. Let us now discover the turn of fortune that fate has wrought. The footman at the entrance cleared his throat, preparing to announce another arrival. The buzz of conversation continued unabated as ladies compared gowns and gentlemen debated the merits of various investments. Lady Millicent Hartwick, a widow of comfortable means and transparent ambition, had positioned herself near Nicholas for the past hour, making pointed observations about the beauty of the decorations and the excellence of the orchestra. "You have outdone yourself this year, my lord," she purred, touching his sleeve with gloved fingers. "Kenwood Hall has never looked more magnificent." Nicholas offered a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "My staff deserve the credit, Lady Hartwick. I merely approved the arrangements." "Such modesty," she laughed, a calculated trill. "But surely you must take some pride in maintaining such traditions. Why, I was just saying to dear Lady Georgiana that a house like this requires the proper mistress to truly shine." Before Nicholas could deflect this transparent hint, the footman's voice rang out across the ballroom with an announcement that would shatter the carefully maintained composure of England's highest society. "Mrs. Lydia Catherine Sutton and Miss Rose Sutton." The name struck Nicholas like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt, candlelight swimming before his eyes as he turned toward the entrance. It was impossible. Lydia Fairmont had died 5 years ago. He had searched for her, offered rewards, haunted every coastal village between Portsmouth and Dover. The officials had declared her lost with 46 others when the postal packet went down in that terrible storm. He had mourned her, buried an empty coffin, and finally, painfully, forced himself to continue living in a world without her light. But there, framed in the doorway like an apparition, stood a woman whose face he would have recognized in any crowd, across any distance, despite the passage of 5 impossible years. Lydia Catherine Fairmont, alive. She wore mourning grey that should have made her look severe, but instead emphasized the delicate architecture of her face. Her dark hair was simply dressed, without the elaborate curls currently in fashion. She held the hand of a small girl with golden curls and solemn eyes, a child perhaps 5 years old, who clutched a worn cloth rabbit and surveyed the glittering assembly with the gravity of someone far older. The ballroom fell silent. Every eye turned from the woman in the doorway to the Marquess, whose face had gone white as the snow falling beyond the windows. Nicholas could not breathe, could not think. The world narrowed to that single point of impossible reality. Lydia, standing not 20 feet away, alive and whole and wearing another man's name like a shroud. Lady Hartwick made a small, shocked sound beside him. Around the room, whispers erupted like wildfire. "But she is dead. The Fairmont girl who drowned. How can this be? Who is that child?" Lydia stood perfectly still, Her chin lifted in that gesture of quiet dignity he remembered so well. Her eyes found his across the crowded room, and he saw in them a mixture of pain, determination, and something that looked terrifyingly like goodbye. He moved before conscious thought, crossing the ballroom floor with long strides that scattered dancing couples like startled birds. People fell back, creating a corridor between them. Dozens of faces turned to witness this impossible reunion. When he reached her, close enough to see the fine lines of grief around her eyes, close enough to catch the faint scent of lavender that had haunted his dreams for 5 years, Nicholas found his voice had abandoned him entirely. He could only stare, drinking in every detail as if to confirm she was truly corporeal, and not some cruel phantom conjured by too much brandy and winter melancholy. It was Lydia who spoke first, her voice low and steady despite the tremor he could see in her hands. "Lord Kenwood," she said, using his title with careful formality, "I apologize for the intrusion. I required an audience, and your Christmas ball seemed the appropriate venue." Her words were ice water on his paralyzed thoughts. An audience? He barely recognized his own voice, rough as gravel. "You have been dead for 5 years, and you appear at my door requiring an audience?" A flush rose in her pale cheeks, but she held his gaze. "I was never dead, my lord, merely lost. And by the time I was found, circumstances had changed considerably for both of us." The small girl tugged at Lydia's hand, and she glanced down with an expression of such tender concern that something cracked in Nicholas's chest. When Lydia looked back at him, her eyes held a silent plea for understanding he was not yet ready to grant. "This is Rose," Lydia said quietly, "my late husband's daughter. I have come to formally reintroduce myself to society, as my situation requires witnesses of quality to establish my position." She paused, then added with devastating honesty, "I did not know you would be here." That last admission, delivered in a tone that suggested she had perhaps hoped to avoid him entirely, struck Nicholas harder than any accusation could have. She had not come seeking him, had not rushed to his door with explanations and tears, had instead arrived in widow's grey, trailing another man's child, to use his ballroom as a stage for her resurrection. "We will speak," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut crystal, "privately. Now." Lydia's expression flickered with something that might have been fear or relief, and she nodded. "Rose will need supervision." "Lady Georgiana," Nicholas called to his sister, who stood frozen near the refreshment table, her hand pressed to her mouth in shock. "Please see that the child is given cake and lemonade in the drawing room." His sister recovered herself admirably. "Of course." She hurried forward, extending a hand to Rose with a gentle smile. "Hello, dear one. Shall we find you something delicious? I believe cook has made gingerbread shaped like Christmas trees." Rose offered Mr. Buttons forward slightly, signaling her trust in the intimidating figure. Rose looked up at Lydia, who nodded encouragingly. "Go with the kind lady, sweetheart. I will come find you very soon." The child went reluctantly, glancing back twice as Lady Georgiana led her from the ballroom. The assembled guests watched in stunned silence as Nicholas placed a hand on Lydia's elbow and guided her toward his study with barely contained fury. Behind them, the whispers exploded into open speculation. Nicholas closed the study door with exaggerated care, afraid that if he slammed it as his rage demanded, he might shatter the fragile reality of her presence. He turned to face the woman who had haunted every dream and waking thought for 5 years, this impossible ghost, wearing mourning silk and carrying the weight of inexplicable betrayal. Lydia stood before his desk, hands clasped tightly at her waist, her posture revealing the rigid self-control of someone preparing for battle. In the warm light of the study's fire, he could see her more clearly. She was thinner than he remembered, her face bearing the marks of hardship he could not begin to imagine, but her eyes held the same fierce intelligence, the same quiet strength that had first captivated him 8 years ago when they met at a country assembly and talked until dawn about poetry and philosophy. "Explain," he commanded, his voice dangerously soft. "Explain how you are standing in my study when I buried you, when I searched every village, every hospital, every godforsaken beach between here and Dover, when I offered enough money to rebuild a cathedral for information about your whereabouts. Explain how you are alive, and I knew nothing of it." Lydia flinched, but did not look away. The packet went down in a storm on November 7th, 1814. I remember boarding in Portsmouth that morning. I remember the wind rising, the terrible pitching of the ship. Then nothing but darkness and cold water. I woke 3 days later in a cottage in Hampshire with no memory of my own name. Nicholas felt the air leave his lungs. Amnesia. For 4 months, she confirmed, a man named Benjamin Sutton found me on the beach more dead than alive. He was a widower, owned a shipyard in Portsmouth, had an infant daughter. He took me to his home, nursed me through fever and pneumonia. His housekeeper was a former midwife who knew herbs and healing. They saved my life, but my memory remained gone. She moved to the window, though there was nothing to see but darkness and falling snow. Her reflection in the glass looked ghostly, insubstantial. Fragments returned slowly. A name here, a face there. By February I knew my own name. By March I remembered my father's estate, remembered you. Her voice caught slightly on that last word. I asked for newspapers. That was when I learned you had become Marquess. Your brothers died of typhoid fever while I was lost. The articles mentioned you were in mourning, that you had recently concluded an extensive search for someone who died in the shipwreck. Nicholas gripped the edge of his desk, knuckles white. You knew I had searched. You knew, and yet you did not send word. I was living in the home of a man not my husband, Lydia said, turning to face him. Unchaperoned for months. You were now a Marquess, one of the most powerful men in England. I was legally dead, had been declared so by official records. How could I simply appear and claim otherwise? What would society have said? What would your family have said? She had considered a letter, but the paper offered no proof of virtue. It would only have caused Nicholas agonizing uncertainty, or worse, provoked a desperate, compromised reunion before her reputation was secure. I would not have cared what anyone said, Nicholas growled. You were alive. That was all that mattered. Was it? Lydia's eyes held his, unflinching. Would your family have welcomed a woman who lived alone with another man? Would the ton have believed my story? Or would they have whispered that I arranged the entire thing, that I was perhaps never on that ship at all? The terrible logic of her words struck him like blows. Society was unforgiving, especially to women. His mother would have been horrified. His position would have been compromised. And yet, for you could have tried, he said, his anger cracking to reveal the grief beneath. You could have sent a letter, anything. Instead, you married him. Lydia's composure finally broke. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her face. Benjamin was dying. He had a wasting sickness of the lungs that worsened every winter. His daughter Rose was 3 years old when he realized he had perhaps a year to live. His cousins were circling like vultures, ready to claim his business and his child the moment he died. She lowered her hands, and Nicholas saw tears tracking down her cheeks, though her voice remained steady. He asked me to marry him on his deathbed 3 years after he found me. Not because he loved me, though we had grown fond of each other, but because Rose needed a mother, needed legal protection from relatives who saw her only as an inconvenience to be institutionalized or married off as quickly as profitable. Benjamin gave me everything. He asked for one thing in return. How could I refuse? You could have refused by loving me, Nicholas said, and immediately hated himself for the selfishness of it. Lydia's laugh was bitter. I did love you. That was precisely why I could not come back. You were Marquess of Kenwood, expected to marry well and provide heirs. I was a scandal waiting to happen, a woman who had lived inappropriately and could prove nothing of her virtue. And there was Rose, innocent and needing protection. Benjamin was kind to me when I had nothing and no one. He saved my life twice. How could I choose my own happiness over the life of a child? The question hung between them, unanswerable and damning. Nicholas turned away, unable to look at her while his carefully maintained rage dissolved into something far more painful. When did he die? He asked quietly. 8 months ago. April of this year. He lasted longer than the physicians predicted. Lydia's voice softened with genuine grief. He was a good man, Nicholas. He never asked more of me than I could give. He loved Rose with everything he had, and he trusted me to protect her when he was gone. And now his cousins challenge you. They petition for custody, claiming I exercised undue influence over Benjamin in his final illness. They say our marriage was invalid because he was not of sound mind. If they succeed, Rose will be taken from the only mother she has ever known and given to people who see her as a burden or a commodity. Lydia moved closer to him, and he caught that scent of lavender again, mixed now with something else, something that spoke of grief and desperation. I need to be seen by society, Nicholas. Need to be witnessed as a respectable widow with connections to quality families. My solicitor said attending a significant event with proper introductions could strengthen my legal position. Your Christmas ball is the most important social gathering of the season. I thought if I could be seen here, perhaps introduced by Lady Georgiana or another prominent guest, it might help establish my legitimacy. You intended to use me, Nicholas said flatly. I intended to save a child, Lydia corrected, her voice sharpening with defensive pride. I did not know you would be here, assumed you would be hosting but not in attendance. I planned to speak with your sister, explain my situation, request an introduction. I never meant for you to see me. The admission stung worse than anything else she had said. She had not wanted him to see her, had hoped to slip into his house, use his family's influence and vanish back into whatever life she had constructed without him. And after? He asked, turning to face her again. After you secured your legal position, what then? Were you going to disappear again? Leave me to wonder if I had imagined the entire encounter. Lydia met his gaze, and in her eyes he saw exhaustion and resignation that made her look far older than her 27 years. I did not imagine we would speak again, she said softly. I thought perhaps you had married. Thought certainly you had moved forward with your life. I have been dead to you for 5 years, Nicholas, dead and buried and mourned. I did not presume to resurrect myself in your heart as well as your ballroom. The words should have offered him an opening to reject her, to order her from his house and his life. Instead, they revealed the terrible truth he had been avoiding since the moment he saw her in the doorway. He had never stopped loving her, not in 5 years of grief and guilt and carefully constructed numbness. Seeing her alive did not erase the pain of believing her lost, but neither did it diminish the fierce, irrational joy of knowing she breathed, walked, existed in the same world as himself. I did not marry, he heard himself say. Could not. Every woman I met I compared to you and found wanting. My mother was quite undone. My sister staged elaborate dinner parties with eligible ladies. I remained politely, stubbornly alone. Lydia closed her eyes, a single tear escaping to trace down her cheek. I am sorry for all of it, for leaving you to grieve, for not finding a way to return, for appearing tonight and disrupting your carefully ordered life. I am so profoundly sorry. The distance between them seemed suddenly unbearable. Nicholas crossed it in 3 strides, stopping only when he was close enough to see the fine grain of her skin, the small scar above her left eyebrow that was new since he last saw her. I searched for you, he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. For 8 months I did nothing but search. I offered rewards large enough to support a family for years. I interviewed survivors, combed beaches, haunted every inn and boarding house. I would not believe you were gone until I had no choice. I know, Lydia whispered. Benjamin told me. He saw the notices, knew you were searching for someone lost in the wreck. He asked if I was that person. I could not remember, and by the time I could, you had stopped searching. You had returned to Kenwood. The papers said you were fulfilling your duties as Marquess. I thought you had accepted it. I never accepted it. I merely learned to survive it. They stood so close now that he could feel the warmth of her breath, see the rapid pulse at the base of her throat. Every instinct demanded he pull her into his arms, confirm her solidity, her reality. But between them stood 5 years of grief, a dead man's kindness, and a small girl who needed a mother more than he needed resolution. What happens now? Lydia asked, her voice barely audible. With us, I mean. If there is still an us to consider. Nicholas forced himself to step back, to think rather than simply feel. Now we return to the ballroom. You will be properly introduced to society. My family will vouch for your character and your history. We will make it impossible for anyone to question your respectability or your rights as Rose's mother. Lydia blinked, clearly having expected rejection rather than alliance. You would do that after everything? I would do that because a child's future should not be destroyed by adults' failures, Nicholas said firmly. Rose did not choose her circumstances any more than you or I did. If society's approval can protect her, then society will approve, I promise you that. Relief and gratitude warred across Lydia's face, followed swiftly by wariness. And what would you ask in return? The question revealed how thoroughly she expected the world to demand payment for kindness. Nicholas felt anger stir anew, not at her, but at every circumstance that had taught her to expect conditional compassion. I ask nothing, he said coldly, except perhaps that you remain in Sussex long enough for the legal matters to be settled. If you flee back to Hampshire tomorrow, my assistance will have been for nothing. Lydia nodded slowly. I have taken rooms at the village inn. Rose and I can stay as long as necessary. Nonsense, you will stay here at Kenwood Hall. Guest quarters are extensive and entirely proper. Lady Georgiana will be delighted to have company, and Rose will be more comfortable than at an inn. He could see her preparing to refuse, to maintain the careful distance she had constructed between her new life and her lost past. But practical concerns won over pride. Very well, she agreed quietly. Thank you, my lord. Your generosity is more than I deserve. Stop calling me that. The words came out sharper than he intended. You called me Nicholas once. The title has not changed who I am, only what I am required to do. Something flickered in Lydia's eyes, too complex to name. You have changed, she said. You are harder now, more careful. The Nicholas I knew would have raged and thrown things. This controlled fury is somehow worse. The Nicholas you knew was a third son with no responsibilities beyond his own amusement, he replied. That man died when my brothers did. What remains is someone who understands duty and obligation, even when they taste like poison. Before Lydia could respond, a soft knock sounded at the study door. Lady Georgiana entered without waiting for permission, her expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. Forgive the interruption, she said, her eyes moving between her brother and Lydia with keen intelligence. But the guests are becoming restless with speculation. Lady Millicent has been spreading the most absurd theories, and I thought perhaps we might address the situation before rumors become completely unmanageable. Nicholas nodded, grateful for his sister's practical nature. An excellent suggestion. Mrs. Sutton has agreed to stay at Kenwood Hall while certain legal matters are concluded. I trust you will assist her in settling Rose and herself comfortably. Georgiana's face lit with genuine pleasure. I would be delighted, and the child is utterly charming. She has been telling me about her cloth rabbit's adventures with great solemnity. Her smile softened as she looked at Lydia. You are very welcome here, Mrs. Sutton. Any friend of my brother's is family to me. The simple kindness seemed to undo Lydia's composure more effectively than Nicholas's anger had. She blinked rapidly, clearly fighting tears. You are very kind, Lady Georgiana. More than I expected or deserve. Nonsense, Georgiana said briskly, taking Lydia's arm. Now let us return to the ballroom and show all those gossiping cats that whatever happened in the past, you are here now and under Kenwood's protection. That should silence most of the speculation. As they moved toward the door, Nicholas caught Lydia's hand, stopping her for one more moment. She looked back, questioning. This is not finished, he said quietly, for her ears alone. We have much to discuss that has nothing to do with legal battles or social approval. Understanding and apprehension crossed her face in equal measure. I know, she whispered, but perhaps some things are better left buried with the dead woman I was supposed to be. Perhaps, Nicholas agreed, releasing her hand. Or perhaps some things refuse to stay buried, no matter how much earth we pile upon them. They returned to the ballroom together, Nicholas on one side of Lydia and Georgiana on the other, presenting a united front that sent clear signals to everyone watching. Rose was retrieved from the drawing room and brought to stand with her mother, one small hand clutching Lydia's skirt, while the other maintained firm grip on her beloved rabbit. The orchestra had stopped playing. Every eye in the assembly fixed upon the small party at the ballroom's entrance. Nicholas could feel the weight of speculation, curiosity, and in some cases, barely concealed hostility. He raised his voice to carry across the crowded room. Ladies and gentlemen, I must beg your indulgence for the disruption to our evening's festivities. As you have no doubt observed, we have been graced with the return of someone long believed lost to us. Many of you may remember Miss Lydia Fairmont, daughter of the late Mr. Charles Fairmont of Hartwell Manor. She was among those declared dead in the tragic wreck of the Portsmouth packet 5 years past. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the assembly. Several ladies clutched their fans as if the news required smelling salts. Gentlemen exchanged glances of surprise and speculation. Nicholas continued, his tone brooking no argument. Miss Fairmont survived that disaster, through circumstances I shall not detail publicly, as they involve considerable suffering and loss of memory. She has since married and been tragically widowed. She now stands before you as Mrs. Lydia Sutton, mother to young Rose and deserving of every courtesy and respect this company can offer. He let his gaze sweep the room, meeting the eyes of the most influential guests with deliberate challenge. I trust that all present will join me in welcoming Mrs. Sutton back to society and offering their support in her time of difficulty. Any who find themselves unable to extend such basic Christian charity may consider themselves no longer welcome at Kenwood Hall. The threat was clear and effective. No one present would risk losing access to one of England's most influential families over gossip about a shipwreck survivor. Several ladies stepped forward immediately, including the Duchess of Hartwell, who had known Lydia's father. "My dear child," the Duchess said warmly, taking Lydia's hands, "what a miracle to see you alive and well. Your father was a dear friend of my late husband. You must call upon me tomorrow and tell me everything of your adventures, and this precious girl." She smiled at Rose, who had retreated partially behind Lydia's skirts. "She has your eyes, has she not?" The implication that Rose might be Lydia's natural daughter was generous fiction, and Lydia seized upon it gratefully. "She is my heart," she said simply, which had the virtue of being absolutely true. Other guests followed the Duchess's lead, approaching to offer welcome and condolences in equal measure. Lady Millicent maintained stiff distance, her expression suggesting she had swallowed something sour. But the general tide of acceptance was unmistakable, particularly after Lady Georgiana announced that Mrs. Sutton and her daughter would be staying at Kenwood Hall for the foreseeable future. The orchestra resumed playing. Couples returned to dancing. The evening continued as if the very foundations of Nicholas's carefully reconstructed world had not just been shattered and rebuilt in the space of an hour. Rose, overwhelmed by the noise and strangers, began to droop against Lydia's side. Nicholas noticed and gestured to the footman. "Please have Mrs. Henderson prepare the blue guest suite and the adjoining nursery. Mrs. Sutton and Miss Rose will be retiring shortly." Lydia shot him a grateful glance. "Thank you. Rose is not accustomed to such late hours or such crowds. I will show you to your rooms," Georgiana offered, already moving to take Rose's hand. "Come along, little one. I believe there is warm milk and gingerbread waiting for you upstairs." As they prepared to depart, Nicholas found himself reluctant to let Lydia leave his sight, irrational as that impulse was. 5 years of believing her dead had created a superstitious fear that if he looked away, she might vanish like morning mist. "Rest well," he said formally. "We will speak again tomorrow regarding the legal proceedings." Lydia nodded, her exhaustion now evident in every line of her posture. "Good night, Lord Kenwood, and thank you for everything." She followed Georgiana from the ballroom, Rose leaning heavily against her side, leaving Nicholas to face the remainder of his guests alone. He accepted congratulations and fielded questions with practiced smoothness, revealing nothing of the tempest raging beneath his controlled exterior. The ball continued until the small hours of Christmas morning. When the last guest had departed and the servants had begun clearing away the remnants of celebration, Nicholas retreated to his study with a decanter of brandy and the crushing weight of impossible complications. Lydia was alive. That single fact should have been cause for pure joy. Instead, it brought with it a tangled knot of grief, anger, betrayal, and beneath it all, the stubborn insistence of love that refused to die despite having every reasonable excuse to do so. She had married another man, had made a life without him, had a child even if not by blood who called her mother and looked to her for protection. 5 years was not a lifetime, but it was long enough to change everything. The girl he had loved was gone, replaced by this woman in widow's grey who carried scars he could not see and responsibilities he could not dismiss. And yet, when she looked at him, he saw echoes of the girl who had stayed up until dawn debating philosophy, who had laughed at his terrible poetry and challenged his assumptions about everything he thought he knew. She was still there, beneath the armor of grief and necessity. Still Lydia, still the woman who had captured his heart so completely that 5 years of determined effort had not succeeded in reclaiming it. The question was what to do with that knowledge now that she had returned from the dead. Christmas morning dawned bright and cold, the snow from the previous night blanketing Kenwood Hall's extensive grounds in pristine white. Nicholas had slept poorly and rose early, finding his study still reeking of brandy fumes and regret. He was reviewing correspondence when Georgiana entered without knocking, a habit that usually irritated him, but today he found oddly comforting. "She is awake," his sister announced, settling into the chair opposite his desk. "I have ordered breakfast sent to her room as the child is still sleeping." Nicholas set aside his letters. How does she seem? Exhausted, frightened, trying desperately not to show either. Georgiana studied him with the directness that had always made her impossible to fool. "Nicholas, what are you going to do?" "Help her secure legal guardianship of Rose, ensure her reputation is protected. Provide whatever assistance she requires." "I meant," Georgiana said patiently, "what are you going to do about the fact that you are clearly still in love with her and she with you, despite 5 years and a dead husband between you?" Nicholas flinched. "You presume much." "I presume nothing. I observe. You have been half dead yourself since the shipwreck, performing obligations but never truly living. Then she walks through that door and suddenly you are alive again, angry and hurting but alive, and she looks at you as if you are both her salvation and her doom." "She made choices," Nicholas said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. "She could have returned to me. She chose differently." "She chose a dying man's child over her own happiness," Georgiana corrected. "That is not exactly a character flaw, brother. Rather the opposite." Nicholas rose, restless, and moved to the window. The gardens lay peaceful and perfect under their blanket of snow. "What would you have me do? Court a woman in mourning? Propose marriage 8 months after her husband's death? Society would be scandalized." "Society was prepared to believe she conspired in her own disappearance until you vouched for her," Georgiana pointed out. "Your position grants considerable freedom to disregard conventional opinion when circumstances warrant. And what of her wishes? Perhaps she has no desire to resurrect what we had. Perhaps 5 years is too long and we are strangers now." "Then you will know that," Georgiana said gently. "But you will never know unless you ask. And Nicholas, you have been grieving her for 5 years. Do not waste the miracle of her return by being too proud or too cautious to discover if what you had can be rebuilt." Before he could respond, a knock sounded at the study door. The butler entered, bearing a sealed letter on a silver tray. "This just arrived by special messenger, my lord. The rider said it was urgent." Nicholas took the letter, noting the legal seal with a sinking feeling. He broke it open and read quickly, his expression darkening with each line. "What is it?" Georgiana asked, reading his face. "The Sutton cousins have accelerated their petition," Nicholas said grimly. "A hearing has been scheduled for January 2nd in London. They are arguing that Mrs. Sutton, being formally declared legally dead, has no standing to claim guardianship. Furthermore, they suggest that her marriage to Benjamin Sutton was invalid because she was using a false identity, having been officially recorded as deceased." "That is absurd," Georgiana protested. "She had amnesia. She did not fraudulently claim to be alive. Legal proceedings are rarely concerned with justice, only precedent and procedure," Nicholas said, already moving toward the door. "Lydia must be informed immediately. She will need the best solicitors in London, and the case must be prepared with extreme care." He found Lydia in the blue guest suite, seated in a window seat that overlooked the snow-covered gardens. She wore a simple morning dress in dark grey, her hair loosely pinned. The vulnerability of her unguarded expression soft with thought and sadness, made her look heartbreakingly young. She turned as he entered, and her face immediately composed itself into polite inquiry. The transformation from vulnerability to controlled courtesy was so swift, it made him ache. "Lord Kenwood, I did not expect to see you so early. Rose is still sleeping." "I bring news," Nicholas said, holding up the letter. "Your legal situation has become more complicated." He explained the contents of the letter, watching her face pale with each revelation. When he finished, she sat very still, hands clenched in her lap. "They mean to take her," she said quietly. "They will argue I am not even legally alive, therefore not legally married, therefore not legally Rose's mother. It is elegant in its cruelty." "We will fight it," Nicholas said firmly. "I have already sent for the finest solicitors in London. They will travel with us when we go for the hearing." "Us?" Lydia looked up sharply. "You need not involve yourself further. You have already done more than anyone could expect." "I am already involved," Nicholas said, moving to stand before her. "My testimony regarding your identity will be crucial, as will statements from anyone who knew you before the shipwreck and can confirm you are indeed Lydia Fairmont." "The Duchess," Lydia said, hope flickering in her eyes. "She knew my father, and perhaps Lady Georgiana would be willing to testify about my character. Georgiana will do more than testify. She will ensure every influential lady in London understands that to question you is to question Kenwood's judgment." Nicholas allowed himself a tight smile. "My sister is remarkably effective when she chooses to be formidable." Lydia stood, moving to the window. Snow had begun falling again, fat flakes that caught the morning light. "I thought I had escaped the worst when Benjamin died. Foolish of me. Life has taught me repeatedly not to expect safety." The resignation in her voice sparked Nicholas's anger anew, though not at her. At every circumstance that had driven her to expect betrayal and disappointment as her natural state. "You will win this," he said, "not because life is fair, but because we will make it impossible for anyone to rule otherwise. Rose will remain with you. That I promise." Lydia turned from the window, and the look she gave him held such complex emotion he could not name all its components. Gratitude, certainly. Fear, possibly. But underneath, something that looked dangerously like hope. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You owe me nothing. If anything, I owe you apologies enough to fill the rest of my life. Yet you defend me, shelter me, promise assistance, as if I have any right to claim it." Nicholas crossed to her, stopping close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, the small freckles across her nose that powder could not quite hide. "Do you truly not know?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Because 5 years ago I loved you more than I had ever loved anything in my life," he said, the words raw and honest. "Because I searched until I had no hope left, and even then I could not quite stop hoping. Because seeing you walk through that door alive and whole felt like every prayer I ever sent into the void, finally receiving answer." Tears spilled down Lydia's cheeks, though she made no sound. "Nicholas, I do not know what we are now," he continued, "or what we might become. Too much has changed and we are not who we were. But I know that child deserves a mother who loves her, and you are that mother. Everything else we can determine later." "There may be no later," Lydia said, her voice breaking. "If I lose Rose, I will have nothing left. Benjamin trusted me to protect her. It was his dying wish, if I fail him." "You will not fail," Nicholas interrupted. "I will not allow it. We will go to London after Christmas. We will face these cousins in court, and we will ensure that Rose remains exactly where she belongs." A soft sound from the adjoining nursery made them both turn. Rose appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, her cloth rabbit clutched under one arm and sleep tousling her golden curls. "Mama," she said uncertainly, then noticed Nicholas and moved instinctively closer to Lydia. "Who is the man?" Lydia knelt, opening her arms, and Rose ran into them with the absolute trust of a loved child. "This is Lord Kenwood, sweetheart. He is an old friend who is helping us. You remember we talked about the nice man who would make sure you stay with Mama?" Rose studied Nicholas with solemn consideration, then surprised him by asking, "Do you like rabbits?" "I have always been fond of them," Nicholas said gravely, matching her serious tone. "Particularly rabbits who are well-traveled and wise." "Mr. Buttons is very wise," Rose agreed. "Papa gave him to me before he went to heaven. He said Mr. Buttons would help me be brave." Something in Nicholas's chest cracked at the matter-of-fact way this small child discussed death and separation. She could not be more than 5, yet she spoke of loss with the unsuitable awareness of mortality and disappointment. "Your papa was right," Nicholas said gently, "and I think Mr. Buttons is doing an excellent job." Rose nodded, satisfied with this assessment, then looked up at Lydia. "Can we have breakfast? Lady Georgiana promised there would be jam." "Lady Georgiana is very kind," Lydia said, standing and taking Rose's hand. "Let us get you dressed first, then we shall go find that jam." Nicholas watched them retreat to the nursery, hearing Rose's chatter about gingerbread and snow, and whether Mr. Buttons would like Christmas presents. The easy affection between woman and child was evident in every gesture, every tone. Whatever else might be uncertain, Lydia's love for Rose was absolute. And that, Nicholas realized, was precisely what made this situation so impossible. He could not simply reclaim what he had lost 5 years ago, could not court Lydia as if Benjamin Sutton had never existed, as if Rose were not woven permanently into the fabric of her life. Any future that included Lydia necessarily included Rose. The question was whether he could accept that, whether he could love not just the woman, but the family she had become. He could. He loved the woman, and thus he accepted the family she had become. Christmas Day passed quietly. Georgiana insisted they attend church services in the village, where Lydia's presence caused another stir of speculation and surprise. But with Nicholas on one side and the Duchess of Hartwell on the other, even the most dedicated gossips could do little but whisper behind gloved hands. Rose was fascinated by the church's stained glass windows and the elaborate nativity scene, asking questions in her clear, piping voice that made several elderly ladies smile indulgently. She sat between Lydia and Georgiana during the service, remarkably well behaved for such a young child. Afterward, they returned to Kenwood Hall for Christmas dinner, a smaller affair than the previous night's ball, but still formal enough that Rose's eyes grew round at the elaborate table settings and endless courses. "Is this what lords eat every day?" she whispered to Lydia, loud enough that everyone heard. "Only on special occasions," Georgiana said with a laugh. "Most days we make do with only 6 or 7 courses instead of 12. Rose considered this gravely. "That still seems like quite a lot." "Indeed it does," Nicholas agreed, earning a surprised smile from the child. He found himself watching Lydia throughout the meal, noting how she managed her grief with practiced grace, how she attended to Rose while maintaining appropriate social interaction with his family. She was exhausted. He could see it in the fine lines around her eyes, the way she occasionally seemed to drift away mid-conversation, but she never let her composure slip entirely. After dinner, Georgiana suggested they retire to the drawing room for gifts. Rose's excitement at this prospect was the first truly childlike emotion Nicholas had seen from her, and it made him realize how much weight this small person carried, how aware she was of her precarious position. The staff had prepared a few simple gifts for Rose at Georgiana's direction: a new doll, a picture book of animals, a warm cloak in dark blue wool. Rose's delight was disproportionate to the value of the gifts, and her careful thank yous to everyone present spoke to Lydia's attention to teaching proper manners. "And this," Georgiana said, producing one final package, "is for your mama, from all of us, welcoming her to Kenwood Hall." Lydia's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the gift. Inside was a beautifully bound journal and a set of fine pens. "For writing your story," Georgiana explained. "Whatever you wish to remember or record." "It is too much," Lydia protested, but her eyes had filled with tears. "Nonsense," Georgiana said firmly. "Every story deserves to be told, especially the ones that seem impossible." That evening, after Rose had been settled in the nursery with her new treasures, Nicholas found Lydia in the library, curled in a chair before the fire with the journal open on her lap. She had not yet written anything, simply sat staring at its pages remaining resolutely bare, as if they held answers to questions she had not yet learned to ask. "May I join you?" he asked from the doorway. She nodded, and he settled into the chair opposite, content for a moment simply to share the silence. The fire crackled peacefully. Outside, fresh snow continued to fall, transforming the world into something clean and new. "I have been thinking," Lydia said eventually, "about what you said earlier, about 5 years changing everything." "I should not have been so blunt," Nicholas began, but she shook her head. "No, you were right. We are not who we were. I am not the girl you loved, and you are not the man I left behind. Perhaps that is as it should be. Perhaps what we had was always meant to be a beautiful memory rather than a future." The resignation in her voice ignited something fierce in Nicholas's chest. "Or perhaps," he countered, "what we had was strong enough to survive 5 years and death itself. Perhaps we have been given an impossible second chance, and the only real question is whether we have courage enough to take it." Lydia looked up, meeting his eyes. "I am not free, Nicholas. I am in mourning, legally entangled, and responsible for a child who has lost too much already. Any relationship between us would be complicated beyond measure and scandalous beyond bearing." "I am well aware," Nicholas said. "I am also aware that I have spent 5 years existing in a world without you, and I have no inclination to prolong that painful absence. If complications and scandal are the price of having you in my life again, I find I am willing to pay it." "Rose comes with me," Lydia said, her voice firm despite its tremor. "Wherever I go, whatever I do, she is part of that. I will not abandon her for anyone, not even you." "I would not ask you to," Nicholas said immediately. "Rose needs you and you clearly love her. That is not an obstacle. It is simply a fact to be incorporated into whatever future we might build." Hope and fear warred across Lydia's face. "You do not know what you are saying. Being a stepfather to a child who is not your blood, who will always carry another man's name and remember another father, that is no small thing to accept. Neither is loving a woman who survived shipwreck and amnesia and lost to emerge stronger than she was before," Nicholas said. "I suspect we are both capable of accepting more difficult truths than we credit." Lydia set the journal aside and rose, moving to stand before the fire. The light painted her in shades of gold and shadow, and Nicholas was struck again by how much she had changed while remaining fundamentally herself. "What are you proposing?" she asked quietly. "That we court, that we attempt to rebuild what we had, that we pretend the past 5 years did not happen." "I propose nothing yet," Nicholas said, rising to join her. "You are in mourning, and I will not dishonor Benjamin Sutton's memory by rushing. But I propose that we acknowledge what exists between us, that we allow ourselves the possibility of a future beyond legal battles and social approval, that when the time is right and appropriate, we explore whether what we had can grow into something new. And if it cannot," Lydia's voice was barely a whisper, "if we discover that too much has changed, that we are too different now, then we will know that," Nicholas said, "and we will have at least tried rather than spending the rest of our lives wondering what might have been." He reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat if she wished. But she did not move as he took her hand, her fingers cold despite the fire's warmth. He brought them to his lips, a gesture that was both promise and question. "I loved you then," he said against her knuckles. "I love you now. Whatever shape that love must take, whether as friends or something more, I am willing to discover, if you are." Lydia's breath caught. For a long moment she simply looked at him, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. Then, very slowly, she nodded. "When the legal matters are concluded," she said, "when Rose is safe and my mourning period is complete, then we will see what might be possible." "Agreed," Nicholas said, though every instinct demanded he pull her into his arms immediately and never let go. The days following Christmas passed in a flurry of preparation. Nicholas's solicitors arrived from London, formidable men who spoke in complicated legal terminology and made copious notes about every detail of Lydia's story. They interviewed her repeatedly, establishing timelines, confirming facts, building the framework of a case that would withstand hostile scrutiny. Rose was kept largely sheltered from the activity, spending her days with Georgiana learning to make paper snowflakes and helping the kitchen staff prepare gingerbread. But even a child as young as she was could sense the tension, the undercurrent of worry that permeated the household. "Is Mama sad?" she asked Nicholas one afternoon, when he found her in the drawing room attempting to teach Mr. Buttons to dance. Nicholas sat down beside her, considering how to answer honestly without frightening her. "Your Mama is worried," he said carefully. "She wants very much to make sure you stay together, and sometimes that requires complicated grown-up things that are not very pleasant." "Because of the mean cousins," Rose said matter-of-factly. "Mama told me they want to take me away." But she promised they would not. "Mama does not break promises." "No," Nicholas agreed, impressed by Lydia's honesty with the child. "She does not, and I have promised to help her, which means you will definitely stay together." Rose studied him with those solemn eyes that seemed far too old for her small face. "Papa Benjamin promised too, then he died. Sometimes people break promises even when they do not mean to." The observation was devastatingly astute. Nicholas felt his throat tighten at this child's unsuitable awareness of mortality and disappointment. "That is true," he admitted. "Sometimes circumstances break promises for us. But I am not sick, and neither is your mama. We are both quite healthy and determined. And when two healthy, determined people make promises to protect someone they care about, those promises are very difficult to break." Rose seemed to accept this logic. She returned her attention to Mr. Buttons, making him perform an elaborate bow. "Lady Georgiana says you used to know Mama a long time ago, before I was born." "I did. We were friends." "Are you friends now?" Nicholas considered the question carefully. "We are becoming friends again. It takes time when people have been apart for a long while, but yes, I think we are friends." "Good," Rose said with a decided nod. "Mama needs friends. She is lonely sometimes. I can tell, even though she does not say." The insight pierced Nicholas like a blade. Of course Lydia was lonely. She had lost everything, rebuilt from nothing, and now faced losing it all again. The strength required for that kind of survival left little room for softer needs like companionship and joy. "I will do my best to be a good friend to her," Nicholas promised, "and to you as well, if you will allow it." Rose considered this seriously, then held out Mr. Buttons. "You can hold him if you want. He likes you. He told me." Nicholas accepted the cloth rabbit with appropriate gravity. "Then I shall endeavor not to disappoint him, nor his opinion of me." On the 29th of December, they departed for London. The journey took most of a day, the roads slowed by snow and ice. Rose found the travel exciting initially, but grew restless as the hours passed. Lydia kept her entertained with stories and games, her patience apparently endless, even when she must have been terrified about the upcoming hearing. They arrived at Kenwood's London townhouse after dark, and Lydia and Rose were settled in the guest wing with the same careful attention to propriety that had been observed in Sussex. Nicholas's mother, the Dowager Marchioness, had been summoned from Bath and awaited them in the drawing-room. She was a formidable woman, tall and silver-haired, with the kind of presence that made people straighten their spines and mind their manners. She studied Lydia with frank curiosity when Nicholas made introductions. "So you are the girl my son mourned for 5 years," she said without preamble. "Forgive me if I seem less than immediately welcoming. I watched him nearly destroy himself with grief. I am not certain I wish to see that happen again." "Mother," Nicholas said warningly, but Lydia held up a hand. "You need not apologize, Lady Kenwood," she said with quiet dignity. "You are right to be cautious. I disappeared without explanation and returned with complications. I would not welcome me either if I were in your position." The Dowager's expression softened slightly at this honesty. "At least you are not a simpering fool. That is something." She turned her attention to Rose, who had hidden behind Lydia's skirts at this stern examination. "And you, child? What is your name?" "Rose Sutton, ma'am," Rose said, her voice very small. "And this is Mr. Buttons." "A rabbit," the Dowager observed. "How practical. Rabbits are quiet and require no feeding, much more sensible than a puppy." "Papa gave him to me," Rose said, gaining courage. "He is very old and very wise." "All the best rabbits are," the Dowager agreed with unexpected gentleness. "You may call me Lady Althea, as I suspect we shall be seeing quite a lot of each other. Nicholas, ring for tea. If we are to face unpleasant legal proceedings tomorrow, we should at least do so properly fortified. The hearing was scheduled for the morning of January 2nd at the Court of Chancery. Nicholas had arranged for the finest barristers in London, men who could pass the complicated intersection of maritime law, marriage law, and questions of identity with surgical precision. The night before, unable to sleep, Nicholas found Lydia in the townhouse library, much as he had found her at Kenwood. She sat before the fire, the journal Georgiana had given her open on her lap, its pages remaining resolutely bare. "Cannot write?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Cannot think what to say," Lydia admitted. "How does one begin to put such a story into words? Where does it even start? With the shipwreck, with meeting you 8 years ago, with Benjamin finding me on the beach?" "Perhaps it starts with tomorrow," Nicholas suggested. "With what comes next rather than what came before." Lydia shook her head. "I am terrified, Nicholas, not just of losing Rose, though that fear is overwhelming enough, but of everything else, of what happens if we win, of the future that means I must navigate, of whether I have strength enough to keep standing." "You do," Nicholas said with absolute certainty. "You survived shipwreck and amnesia. You rebuilt yourself from nothing. You loved a dying man's child enough to make her your own. You are the strongest person I have ever known, even if you cannot see it." "I do not feel strong," Lydia whispered. "I feel like I am held together with string and prayers, and any moment now I will simply collapse." Nicholas reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Then lean on me. That is what I am here for. You have carried everything alone for so long. Let someone else share the weight." Lydia looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. In the firelight, her eyes held something raw and desperate. "If I let myself need you and then lose you again, I do not think I could survive it." "You will not lose me," Nicholas said. "Not to death, not to circumstance, not to scandal or complication. I am here and I am staying, that I promise." "You cannot promise that, no one can." "Perhaps not," Nicholas conceded. "But I can promise to try with every resource at my disposal, and my resources are considerable." That surprised a laugh from her, brief and startled. "The arrogance of aristocracy. The confidence of someone who has already lost everything once and refuses to do so again," Nicholas corrected. He raised her hand to his lips once more, holding her gaze. "We will win tomorrow. Rose will remain with you, and then we will begin the complicated business of discovering what future we might build." "I want to believe you," Lydia said softly. "Then believe me. Trust me. Let me help carry what you cannot hold alone." They sat together in silence after that, hands linked, watching the fire burn down to embers. Whatever tomorrow brought, at least they would face it together, rather than alone in their separate griefs. The Court of Chancery was everything one might expect of English legal proceedings, dusty, ornate, and filled with men in elaborate robes who spoke in language designed more to confuse than clarify. The Sutton cousins had engaged their own barristers, and the battle lines were drawn with ruthless precision. Rose was not required to attend, having been left with Georgiana and the Dowager at the townhouse. Lydia sat ramrod straight in the gallery, her dark mourning gown and simple bonnet making her look young and vulnerable, despite her 27 years. The cousins' argument was viciously elegant. They claimed that Lydia Fairmont had been legally declared dead in 1814. Therefore, any marriage contracted after that date under the name Lydia Fairmont was invalid, as one cannot marry a legal non-person. Furthermore, they suggested that Mrs. Sutton had taken advantage of Benjamin's illness to manipulate him into marriage and secure his estate for herself. Nicholas's barristers countered with medical testimony, confirming Lydia's amnesia, statements from the Portsmouth doctor who had treated her, and most devastatingly, a letter from Benjamin Sutton himself, written to his solicitor 2 weeks before his death. The letter was clear and unambiguous. Benjamin had explained his reasons for marriage, his awareness of his impending death, his absolute clarity of mind regarding Rose's need for protection. He had explicitly stated that Lydia had never asked for anything, that the marriage had been his idea, and that he trusted her completely to guard his daughter's future. The judge, a severe man with white hair and penetrating eyes, read the letter twice. Then he looked at the Sutton cousins with something approaching contempt. "It appears," he said dryly, "that the deceased had considerable faith in Mrs. Sutton's character and maternal capabilities. Unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing beyond speculation about legal technicalities, I see no reason to overturn his clearly stated wishes." The cousin's barrister attempted to press the case, arguing about proper procedure and the sanctity of legal death declarations. But the judge was unmoved. "Mrs. Sutton," he said, addressing Lydia directly, "please stand." Lydia rose, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice steady as she acknowledged him. "Yes, my lord. You survived a shipwreck that killed 46 people. You lost your memory, your identity, your entire life as you knew it. When your memory returned, you discovered you had been legally declared dead. Rather than fighting that declaration and causing scandal, you chose to remain in obscurity to spare your family and friends the complication of your resurrection. Is that accurate?" "Yes, my lord." "And Mr. Benjamin Sutton found you, nursed you to health, and eventually proposed marriage not from romantic passion, but from practical necessity to protect his daughter. You accepted knowing he was dying, understanding you would soon be a widow, responsible for a child not your own blood. Is that also accurate?" "Yes, my lord." The judge nodded slowly. "Madam, I have presided over this court for 30 years. In that time, I have seen every form of deception, manipulation, and fraud imaginable. What I see in you is not a fortune hunter or manipulator, but a woman who has been dealt an impossibly difficult hand and played it with as much grace and honor as circumstances allowed." He turned to the cousin's barrister. "Your petition for custody is denied. Mrs. Sutton is and shall remain the legal guardian of Rose Sutton. Furthermore, any future attempts to challenge this arrangement will be viewed with extreme prejudice by this court. Do I make myself clear?" The barrister, recognizing defeat, bowed stiffly. "Perfectly clear, my lord." "Then this hearing is concluded. Mrs. Sutton, you are free to take your daughter home." The relief that flooded through Lydia was visible even from across the courtroom. She swayed slightly, and Nicholas rose from his seat in the gallery to steady her before she could fall. Around them, the courtroom erupted in whispers, but he paid them no mind. "It is over," he said quietly. "Rose is yours. No one can take her from you." Lydia looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time since she had appeared in his ballroom, allowed herself to be vulnerable. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." They returned to the townhouse to find Rose anxiously awaiting them. Mr. Buttons clutched tight against her chest. When she saw Lydia, she flew across the entrance hall and into her arms with a cry of, "Mama!" "It is all right, sweetheart," Lydia said, holding her close. "Everything is all right. We are together and no one can separate us." "The mean cousins lost?" Rose asked, her voice muffled against Lydia's shoulder. "They lost," Lydia confirmed, "completely and permanently." That evening, after Rose had been settled for the night, Nicholas found Lydia once more in the library. But this time the journal in her lap held words. He could see them from where he stood, neat script filling the first page. "You wrote something," he observed. "I wrote," Lydia confirmed. "I wrote about Rose, about the hearing, about impossible victories and second chances." She looked up at him, her eyes clear despite the exhaustion that must have been crushing. "And I wrote about you, about the man who refused to let me face everything alone." Nicholas sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "What comes next?" he asked. "I return to mourning for another 4 months," Lydia said. "That is proper and appropriate. Rose and I will need to find more permanent accommodations than imposing on your hospitality." "Nonsense," Nicholas said immediately. "You will stay at Kenwood Hall for as long as you wish. The estate is extensive, the guest quarters comfortable, and Georgiana has already become absurdly fond of both you and Rose. That is generous beyond measure." "It is practical," Nicholas corrected, "and it allows us time. Time to become reacquainted as the people we are now." Time for Rose to feel secure. Time for you to grieve Benjamin properly and adjust to your new circumstances. Time for me to prove that I meant what I said about not disappearing. Lydia set the journal aside and turned to face him fully. You understand that I am not the girl you remember. That girl died in the shipwreck along with all her innocent assumptions about how the world works. What remains is someone harder, more careful, more scarred. And you understand, Nicholas countered, that I am not the carefree third son who could afford to be romantic and impractical. That man died when his brothers did, and he inherited responsibilities he never wanted. What remains is someone who understands duty and obligation, but who also knows the value of what he once had, and foolishly believed lost forever. We are both compromised by what we have endured, Lydia said softly. We are both survivors, Nicholas corrected. And survival is not damage, it is proof of strength. He reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, but she did not move as he cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized had fallen. I love you, he said simply. I love the girl you were. I love the woman you have become. I will love whoever you continue to grow into. That is the one thing that has not changed and will not change, regardless of circumstances or time. I love you too, Lydia whispered. I loved you then. I loved you through 5 years of believing I could never return, and I love you now despite every logical reason I should protect my heart better. Then that is enough, Nicholas said. For now, that is more than enough. He kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness and promise rather than passion. There would be time for passion later, when mourning was complete and futures were secure. For now, this moment of quiet acknowledgement was sufficient. They sat together as the fire burned down, shoulders touching, hands clasped, neither speaking but both understanding that they had turned a corner into something new. The past 5 years existed and could not be erased, but neither could they define what came next. Spring arrived at Kenwood Hall with an explosion of daffodils and cherry blossoms. Rose, who had never seen such abundance of flowers, spent her days running through the gardens with Mr. Buttons, her laughter carrying through the open windows like music. Lydia had settled into life at Kenwood with surprising ease. She helped Georgiana with household management, read extensively from the library, and slowly allowed herself to shed some of the protective armor she had worn for so long. She still wore mourning, though as the months passed, she had moved into half-mourning with touches of lavender and grey that suggested grief was softening into acceptance. Nicholas courted her carefully and properly, always conscious of propriety and her need for time. They walked in the gardens together, chaperoned by Georgiana or the Dowager. They discussed books and politics and philosophy as they once had, rediscovering the intellectual connection that had first drawn them together. Slowly, carefully, they rebuilt trust and understanding. Rose, observing all of this with a child's uncanny perception, asked Lydia one morning in May, "Is Lord Kenwood going to be my new papa?" Lydia, who had been helping her plant a small herb garden, sat back on her heels in surprise. "What makes you ask that, sweetheart?" "He looks at you the way Papa Benjamin used to look at me," Rose said matter-of-factly. "He looks at you as though you are the most important thing in the world, and you look at him the same way. That means love, right?" The simple observation was so accurate it made Lydia's breath catch. "It does mean love," she admitted, "but love is complicated for grown-ups. There are rules about when people can marry, especially when someone has been married before." "Because of mourning," Rose said, nodding wisely. Lady Georgiana explained, "We wear dark colors to show respect for Papa Benjamin. But when enough time has passed, we can wear pretty colors again and be happy." "That is exactly right. And then Lord Kenwood can be my new papa?" Lydia pulled Rose into her lap, holding her close. "If that is something you would want, and if he asks, and if I say yes. Would you want that, Rose? Would you be happy if Lord Kenwood became part of our family?" Rose nodded against her shoulder. "He is kind, and he makes you smile more. You did not smile much before we came here." I noticed. The tears that filled Lydia's eyes were not from grief, but from overwhelming gratitude for this perceptive, generous child who had been placed in her care. "I love you very much, Rose. You know that, do you not?" "I know," Rose said simply. You are my mama. Not my born mama, but my heart mama. That is better because you chose me. It was Georgiana who finally addressed the situation directly in late May, cornering Nicholas in his study one afternoon when Lydia and Rose had gone to the village with the dowager. "You are going to propose," she said without preamble. "The question is when and how." Nicholas looked up from his correspondence with the expression that suggested he had been expecting this conversation. "Her mourning period ends in June. I thought perhaps after that." "That is only 3 weeks away," Georgiana pointed out. "Have you prepared? Do you have a ring? Have you considered how and where you will ask?" "I have considered little else for the past 4 months," Nicholas admitted, "but I am uncertain how to proceed. The traditional approach seems inadequate given the circumstances." "Then perhaps," Georgiana suggested with a smile, "you should ask her in a way that acknowledges who she is now rather than who she once was. Show her that you love not the ghost of the past, but the woman of the present." The idea took root immediately. Nicholas knew exactly what he would do. On the 24th of June, exactly 6 months after Lydia had appeared in his ballroom like a ghost refusing to stay dead, Nicholas arranged an excursion to the lake on Kenwood's property. It was the same lake that had been frozen solid that terrible December night when they first spoke honestly about the future. Now it lay smooth and warm under summer sun, surrounded by flowering meadows. Rose had been conspiratorially informed of the plan and agreed to stay behind with Georgiana, who promised an afternoon of baking gingerbread. The dowager, with uncharacteristic romanticism, suggested that some things were best done without an audience. Lydia, unaware of Nicholas's intentions, dressed simply in a gown of pale lavender, her hair loosely pinned against the summer heat. She had blossomed over the past months, the haunted look gradually fading from her eyes, her smiles coming more easily. They walked to the lake together, and Nicholas spread a blanket under a willow tree, whose branches trailed in the water like fingers. He had arranged for a basket of refreshments, though food was the furthest thing from his mind. "This is lovely," Lydia said, settling onto the blanket and looking out across the peaceful water. "Thank you for suggesting it. There is something poetic about returning to where difficult conversations began," Nicholas said, sitting beside her. "Last time we were at this lake, it was frozen solid, and we were both frozen inside as well, unable to move forward, unable to let go of the past." Lydia glanced at him, something in his tone alerting her that this was more than simple observation. "And now? Now it is summer. The lake has thawed, and so I hope have we." Nicholas turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "Lydia Catherine Fairmont Sutton, you survived shipwreck and amnesia. You rebuilt yourself from nothing. You sacrificed your own happiness for a child who needed you. You have shown more courage and strength than anyone I have ever known." Tears were already forming in her eyes, though she smiled through them. "Nicholas, what are you doing?" "What I should have done 8 years ago before fate intervened so dramatically." He released her hands long enough to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a ring he had commissioned specifically for this moment. It was not the massive diamond a Marchioness might traditionally wear, but instead a simple band of gold set with 3 stones, sapphire for loyalty, ruby for love, and emerald for hope. "I am not asking you to resurrect what we once had," Nicholas said. "That girl and that boy are gone, replaced by people who understand loss and responsibility and the precious fragility of happiness. I am asking if you would build something new with me, something that honors who we have become rather than who we were." He held up the ring, his hands remarkably steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I am asking if you will marry me, if you will let me be father to Rose and partner to you, if you will trust me with your future and allow me to trust you with mine." Lydia was crying openly now, but her voice was clear as she said, "Yes, to all of it, yes. I will marry you, Nicholas. I will build a new life with you. I will trust you with our future." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, catching the summer light and throwing small rainbows across the blanket. Then finally, after 6 months of careful propriety and restrained affection, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was the kiss of 2 people who had survived death and separation, who had earned their happiness through suffering and perseverance. When they finally drew apart, Lydia was laughing through her tears. "Rose asked me last month if you were going to be her new papa. I told her maybe. I believe she will be quite pleased to have been correct. She is a remarkably perceptive child," Nicholas said, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I have already asked her permission, you know. 2 weeks ago, when you were visiting the Duchess, I explained that I wished to marry her mamma and be a real father to her if she would allow it. She said, and I quote, 'That would be acceptable as long as I understood that Mr. Buttons must also be part of the family.'" Lydia dissolved into genuine laughter. She negotiated for her rabbit. "That is my daughter." "Our daughter," Nicholas corrected gently. "If you will allow me that honor." "Our daughter," Lydia agreed, and the rightness of it settled over them both like a blessing. They returned to Kenwood Hall hand in hand, and Rose's squeal of delight when she saw the ring was heard throughout the house. She ran to Nicholas and threw her arms around his legs with unreserved delight that she would be embraced. "You are going to be my papa," she announced. "I knew it. I told Mama weeks ago." "You were quite correct," Nicholas said seriously, lifting her into his arms. "And I promise to be the very best papa I can be. Though I warn you, I have never done this before, so you may need to teach me." "That is all right," Rose assured him. "Mama had never been a mama before either, and she is very good at it. You will learn." The simple faith in that statement made Nicholas's throat tight. This child, who had lost her birth mother as an infant and her father to illness, accepted him into her small family with the easy confidence of someone who had been loved well and truly. The wedding was planned for December, a full year after Lydia's return from the dead. The symmetry pleased everyone, and it allowed time for preparations appropriate to a marquis's marriage, while avoiding any hint of unseemly haste. The months passed in a blur of happiness that felt almost surreal after so many years of grief and struggle. Lydia worked with the Dowager and Georgiana to plan the wedding, though she insisted on keeping it relatively small and intimate, rather than the massive society event they might have staged. "I have already had one wedding conducted in haste under difficult circumstances," she explained. "This time I want only people who genuinely care about us, not everyone who wishes to be seen at a marquis's wedding." Nicholas supported her completely in this, though he did insist on certain accommodations. "The Duchess of Hartwell must be invited. She has been your champion from the beginning, and the judge who ruled in your favor, I believe he would appreciate seeing the happy ending his decision enabled." Lydia agreed to these additions, and the guest list was finalized at perhaps 50 people, all of whom had played some role in either supporting them or witnessing their journey. Rose, thrilled beyond measure, was to be flower girl. She practiced walking sedately with a basket of rose petals for weeks, though she inevitably ended up running and scattering them with wild abandon. No one minded. The ceremony itself was scheduled for the afternoon of December 24th, exactly 1 year after Lydia had walked back into Nicholas's life. A Christmas Eve wedding seemed fitting, a celebration of new beginnings wrapped in the symbolism of hope and renewal. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow falling softly across Kenwood Hall's grounds. Lydia woke in the room she had occupied for nearly a year, the last morning she would sleep there as an unmarried woman. Georgiana and the Dowager helped her dress, though she had chosen a gown that was elegant but not ostentatious. Pale blue silk that caught the winter light with simple pearl embroidery. An antique locket from her deceased father rested at her throat. Her hair dressed softly with small white flowers. "You look beautiful," Georgiana said, tears in her eyes. "Like someone who has weathered storms and emerged into sunlight." "I feel beautiful," Lydia admitted. "For the first time in years, I feel like I am exactly where I am meant to be." Rose appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her flower girl gown of white velvet. "Mama, you look like a princess. Papa Nicholas is going to forget how to talk when he sees you." "Papa Nicholas," the Dowager repeated with satisfaction. "I like that very much indeed. My son gains a wife and I gain a granddaughter. Rather an excellent arrangement all around." They processed down to the chapel, where 50 guests waited in candlelit warmth. Nicholas stood at the altar with his best man, looking impossibly handsome in formal dark blue. But when Lydia entered and their eyes met, she saw the same overwhelming relief and joy she felt herself. They had made it, against all odds, Through shipwreck and death and legal battles and social complications, they had arrived at this moment together. Rose proceeded down the aisle with great dignity, scattering rose petals with only moderate enthusiasm. Then Lydia followed, walking alone because there was no father to give her away, but holding her head high because she was giving herself, which seemed more honest anyway. When she reached Nicholas, he took her hands and whispered, "You came back to me. You actually came back." "I never really left," Lydia whispered in return. "Not where it mattered." The ceremony was brief and traditional, the vicar speaking of love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. But when it came time for Nicholas to say his vows, he departed from the traditional script. "I vow to love you in sickness and health, in joy and sorrow, through every circumstance life brings," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chapel. "I vow to be father to Rose with the same dedication you have shown as her mother. I vow to remember that you survived impossibilities to be here, and never take for granted the gift of your presence. And I vow that whether we have 1 year together or 50, I will make every day worthy of the journey it took to arrive at this sacred altar." Lydia's voice trembled as she responded with her own vows. "I vow to love you with the whole of who I am now, not who I once was. I vow to seek our future in hope, not in the shadows of what was lost. I vow to trust you with my heart, my daughter, and my dreams. And I vow that whether storms come or sunshine prevails, I will face it all at your side, as partner and equal and beloved wife." The vicar pronounced them married, and when Nicholas kissed his bride, the assembled guests erupted in applause and cheers that echoed through the small chapel. The wedding breakfast was held in Kenwood's great hall, transformed with evergreen boughs and winter flowers. Rose sat between her parents at the head table, beaming with pleasure and occasionally feeding bits of cake to Mr. Buttons when she thought no one was looking. The Duchess of Hartwell stood to make a toast, her voice ringing with genuine emotion. "I have known this family for 40 years. I watched Nicholas grow from boy to man to Marquis. I grieved with him when he lost those he loved, and I am honored to witness him gain them back, transformed but unbroken. To the Marquis and Marchioness of Kenwood, and to the family they have built from courage and love." Later, as evening fell and guests began to depart, Nicholas found Lydia in the same window seat where he had first found her the morning after the Christmas ball. She was watching snowfall, Rose asleep against her shoulder, utterly exhausted from the excitement of the day. "Happy?" he asked, settling beside them. "Absurdly so," Lydia admitted. "I keep expecting to wake and find this is a dream, that I'm still in Benjamin's cottage in Portsmouth, and none of this has happened." "It is not a dream," Nicholas assured her, wrapping his arm around both wife and daughter. "This is real. You are the Marchioness of Kenwood. Rose is officially my daughter through adoption papers finalized last week. We are a family, strange and cobbled together though we may be. My solicitors have confirmed that even with Rose adopted, the title requires an heir of my blood. But Rose is the daughter of my heart. The rest is simply duty that can wait." "The best families are," Lydia said softly. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting firelight and happiness. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for waiting, for loving not just me but her as well." "Thank you," Nicholas countered, "for surviving, for being strong enough to choose life even when it seemed impossibly difficult, for giving me a second chance at happiness I never thought to have again." Rose stirred in her sleep, mumbling something about rabbits and snow. They both smiled, and Lydia shifted her gently to rest more comfortably. "She asked me yesterday," Lydia said, "if we could visit Papa Benjamin's grave in the spring. She wants to tell him about you, make sure he knows she is happy and loved." Nicholas felt his throat tighten. "Of course we will. He gave me everything I hold most precious. The least I can do is ensure his memory is honored as he deserves." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching snow transform the world outside into something clean and new. A year ago, Lydia had appeared like a ghost at a Christmas ball, bringing with her complications and impossibilities. Now she sat here as his wife, their daughter sleeping peacefully between them, and the future stretched ahead full of promise rather than grief. "What are you thinking?" Lydia asked softly. Nicholas considered the question carefully. "I am thinking," he said finally, "that some stories refuse to end when they are supposed to. Some love survives shipwrecks and death and 5 years of separation. And families, I believe, are built not from blood, but from choice, courage, and refusal to surrender to despair." "That is quite philosophical for a wedding night," Lydia teased gently. "I am a marquis," Nicholas replied with mock dignity. "We are expected to be occasionally profound." Lydia laughed, the sound soft so as not to wake Rose. "Well then, Marquis, what profound wisdom do you have about our future?" Nicholas pulled them both closer, feeling the solid reality of wife and daughter, the warmth of family, hard-won and precious beyond measure. "Only this," he said, "that whatever comes, we face it together. That we have already survived the worst life can throw at us and emerged stronger. And that every day from this moment forward is a gift we earned through refusal to surrender." "I can live with that wisdom," Lydia said, resting her head on his shoulder. They remained there as the snow fell and candles burned low, 3 people who had found each other across impossible distances and built something new from the wreckage of what was lost. Outside, Christmas bells began to ring in the village, celebrating the birth of hope itself. Inside Kenwood Hall, a different kind of miracle was being celebrated. The resurrection of a woman believed dead, the salvation of a child who needed love, and the reunion of hearts that refused to accept that some separations were permanent. Nicholas looked down at his sleeping daughter and his exhausted wife, and thought that if this treasure was his prize for having survived catastrophe, then perhaps loss taught appreciation. Perhaps grief deepened joy. Perhaps the journey through darkness made the light, when it finally came, all the more brilliant for its contrast. "Merry Christmas," he whispered to both of them. Lydia smiled without opening her eyes. "Merry Christmas, Nicholas, and Happy New Beginning." "Happy New Beginning," he agreed. And in that moment, with snow falling and bells ringing and family safe in his arms, Nicholas knew with absolute certainty that they would face whatever came next with the same courage and love that had brought them this far. The past 5 years had been impossible, but the future, hard-won and precious, stretched ahead with infinite possibility. Some love stories end with death, some are suspended in grief and mourning, but theirs, against all logic and likelihood, had been given the rarest of gifts, a second chance, and they intended to make absolutely certain they did not waste it. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story of love surviving death, separation, and impossible odds touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of courage, redemption, and hope that refuses to surrender.